Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. My name is Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts at SecurityMetrics. Very excited to be here at the community meeting in Europe at Dublin, Ireland today. And I have two excellent QSAs with me from a couple of different places. I would love for you to introduce yourselves to our listeners, starting with Gary.
Hi, thanks, Jen. Gary Glover, SecurityMetrics, been doing this for a long time. It'll be 19 years in January.
Oh, wow.
So,
but where did you start?
Where did I start? Well, I started as a mechanical engineer in aerospace and did that for 7 years, and then learned how to write software, and then moved to a software company, a little company called Novell. Maybe people have heard of Novell, and did the printer driver download code for all of Novell, and you don't even have to do that anymore, right? It's interesting when you're a software developer for a long time, you know that everything you do is worth nothing in 5 years.
Oh, no.
So then I moved from
We're
software
starting off
development.
on a positive note.
So moved from software development into security. My neighbor, Brad Caldwell, said, hey, come be a security guy. And I'm going, no, I write software. I'm an engineer. You got anything you need me to build? Anything like that? No, security's great. Anyway, turned out to be a good move. Been doing this now for almost 19 years, and
right.
Excited and think the industry is great. So.
Terrific. Andy.
So it was me. So I want to also say thank you for inviting me. I know this probably seems unusual to some of the viewers. Like, is this going to be like
Cage
the
match.
battle of the
QSAs.
Fortunately, Gary's a friend, and we've seen each other in the industry for a long time. So I think this is my either 14th or 15th year as a QSA. And prior to that, I worked in car production before the brands created the SSC. So my story is a little bit probably. It feels a little bit vanilla and a little bit strange, and there's a few odd twists and turns, but I actually started out working in IT services and infrastructure by accident. I spun up an IT services company when I was made redundant whilst I was working at university. The business decided to wind up, and all of our customers were suddenly left without any tech support, so we ran a help desk. So my colleague and I at the time went, ooh, this feels like a business opportunity. So we set up a little company, we serviced all those customers. And then, like a true techie, I got a little bit bored. I was like, we can do this now. We've got a ticketing system. We can take the calls. And I just kind of ran out of stuff to do. And so I sold my half of the company to him and said, I'm going to go and find something else to do. I find myself working in big IT infrastructure for the National Health Service in England. So I ran a huge monitoring infrastructure, watching over huge amounts of financial services systems for the NHS, which is quite interesting. And then, in true techie fashion, I got a little bit bored. And I had a friend who was like, you should come do security stuff with us. Like, you do all the technical stuff. You've worked in data centers. You do the rotations. Like you've done Windows, you've done Linux, you've done all the firewall stuff. Why don't you do this with us? It's kind of interesting. And then I moved to KPMG. So KPMG was my the big four moment. And it feels like you've either done it or you've not done it, and you've got the scars to prove it. And so I stayed there for a little while, and in true fashion, I got the opportunity to take a management role at Trustwave, while Trustwave is still one of the bigger QSAs in the community. And then I did about three or 4 years there, and I just decided I needed a break. It was one of those, it's time to go. Some of the the services side wasn't really things I was interested in. The QSA business was very much like we were doing the same thing. It gets a bit repetitive. And I got this phenomenal call from a gentleman called Rick Dakin. So Rick Dakin was Coalfire's former CEO, passed away a few years ago. Really lovely guy, and he just said, "Andy, we've got a couple of your ex-colleagues. They just said I should give you a call." He's like, "Can you be in New York on Friday?" I was like, "You do know where I live." So I got a flight from Manchester, England, over to New York. And I think the big lesson I looked from this was just say yes if it sounds like it might be interesting. So I said yes to Rick Dakin, and I've now been with Coalfire almost 11 years. I'm a VP in our assurance business. I have a great time. I get to sit on gear with people like Gary, who are phenomenal to be around, collaborate with. I have a fantastic team myself, and I know we'll probably trade shots occasionally. But there's a lot of business in the QSA space, and we all have our own little areas of expertise.
That's the thing.
And also for my sins, I'm a PFI, so I've done investigation work, and I was one of the first P2P QSAs in Europe as well. So it's like I like to do the complicated stuff, and then I wish I didn't like to do that. So
and I know that Gary is the VP over the PFI services at SecurityMetrics. So in other words, you two are very, I would say, competitors. Like the classic, you're both QSAs, you're both BPs, you come from two very big QSAs in the space, and yet you're sitting here collaborating together on something that you mentioned briefly called gear. And so why is it important for what we would consider competitors in the industry? Why have you chosen to be here together? Why do you choose to be on gear together? Gary, maybe tell us what gear is.
Yeah, and this has really been something that's been just fantastic for the industry. I think it's been what, 6 years?
6 years now, I think.
6 years, I think. So 3 different sessions. They do 2-year kind of increments of gear members, and essentially it's just a collection of QSA companies that do a number of the services or the standards, I guess is the way to say it, the support a number of the standards that the PCI Council has out there. So you have to have, I think, support 3 of the standards.
I think it's 3, yeah.
Is it 3?
3 programs.
Three programs you have to be part of. And so it's the QSA companies that are pretty serious about the space, right?
Right.
And I think that's what the council was looking for, was can we get feedback from our customers, right? And I think this was a real great opportunity for the council to, I think they knew we were the customers before, but we didn't have the greatest communication. There wasn't really a venue for it. And so I don't know who came up with it at the time, but we had all been hoping for something like this. One of the reasons I really liked coming to these community meetings is they'd have a QSA meeting afterwards, and we could all ask questions of the council, and they were all sitting up there on the stage up high, and we're down low, and it sort of felt like, please, sir, may I have some more, right? And we got some good answers, and they were very kind, and I'm not saying that was a bad, but it felt different.
It
right?
did, and it was like, watch who goes into remediation next.
Right.
Based on some of the crazy
questions
we would see. You would see, and it was always like a rookie QSA would say something, and then there'd be a collective intake of breath. And you're like, did he really just ask that? And you're like, So we used to see those, and then gear kind of came around, I think, to acknowledge the differentiation. So I think you'll see the people you see at Gear are people who've been around for a long time, have invested into the community, both monetarily, time, support, guidance. If you go through and look at all the white papers and the guidance documents, SecurityMetrics and Coalfire's names on almost all of them. And that by definition is a commitment we make back to everybody for no fees. And there's no business there.
Right.
It's us making sure people are doing the right thing. We're all card holders. We all spend money with credit cards. Nobody wants to see these guys, getting away with the kind of criminality we've seen for a long time. But Gear gives us an opportunity to kind of, there's a little bit of self-validation. There's a little bit of, I watch the nodding heads in the room.
Right, when you make a point, or
you
ask
see
the questions,
something,
like, I want to hear the
there's a
answer
few
to that.
people go, ooh, is that really what these guys do? And then there's a few of us who all know each other and have been in Gear for a while. And there's a few nods, and it was like, I was going to say that.
Right. I'm glad he said it first.
Yeah, I'm glad Andy said that.
So what are some of the topics that Gear has tackled?
So that's a great question. Over the years, we were pretty heavily involved as a group for 4.0. I can't say we developed 4.0. That's really the council's job and the council's purview. But they did, I think one of the first times in this industry, they consulted with us, right?
Yeah,
and asked us, what do you think about this? Or give us feedback on this way early in the process. And I think that's, to me, I feel more ownership in 4.0 because of that opportunity. Right?
I think we've influenced more with 4.0 than we ever did in the past.
Exactly.
I used to feel that 1.0 and 2.0 and all the little transitions were kind of done to us, not for
right,
us.
that's a good way to say it.
And so like 4.0 is kind of, it feels like a coming of age of the standard. It's like, it's not just been done to us. And I think the big indicator for me personally is the speed of which they take Gear's feedback.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. I know the community cycles are quite long-winded, and there's a lot of technical review that goes into the standards being commissioned. But there was some serious issues that Gear discovered, And it's because of the people on gear. So to be on gear, you have to be a leader in your organization. You're typically an executive level member of staff. So you've got decision making. You'll perhaps be engaged in contractual relationships. And there was a number of things that happened. And gear was like, hey, if you do this, it's going to create mayhem. You know, like there'll be some things that you just can't unpick. And it's not compliance, it's not standards, it's the implementation in the real world of how this gets done, how contracts are enforced.
How to affect people
how
legally.
legal will do stuff. And when you're a QSA on the ground, you don't necessarily get involved in any of that. You're like, I'm going to go and do my job. I'm going to write my report on compliance. My boss's boss is going to deal with all that stuff. And then it's us that then pick up all the slack when clients are going like, are we going to get sued if we have this thing? Is it discoverable? There's loads of questions that just sit outside of the realm of the standards. And the ability to go, we saw this, and there's lots of us have mutual clients. You know, there's a lot of the big players in the payments ecosystem don't want just one QSA firm. They'll have 2 and 3 in some cases for regions, or just to be able to resource out the work. And we always talk, there's not been a significant uptick in the number of QSAs in the entire time we've been doing this. I think we capped around 2,500 at one point. And it's you know, there's a lot of grind. Like being a QSA, you're on the road a lot. There's a lot of work. It's very technical in some cases. You know, you can sometimes be the bearer of bad news, or you're the audit guy.
The tough guy.
You know, like I'm going to be the guy who says no. And a lot of people just not cut out for that. Or eventually they're just like, I need a break. You know, I want to go and do something else. I want to build stuff. I want to play with shiny toys. And maybe I come back in at security from another angle. And I mean, I love my QSAs. I really have to respect the time on the road, the time away from families. And then also post-COVID, you know, like we talk about the remote working. You know, like it's no fun being on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom, right?
No, it's tiring. Yeah. People think, oh, this is going to be great.
No, it's a lot more fun to be there in person, for sure.
And that, you know, that's the thing that I really like about one of the points. I think that the people that end up doing and being really good at this QSA assessing don't mind being around people.
Right.
And so being able to then also interact personally with other QSAs and some of the big ones, excuse me, the big companies around the world. I think there's like 38 QSA companies represented on gear from all over the world, right? People from the Asia, South America, Central Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, all over the place.
We've got really good coverage.
Yeah. And so I like that too, that we're, you know, the people that are participating are coming from all over, and we get to have physical, hopefully most of the time, right? Some of the people don't fly all the way for all of the meetings, and some of them attend virtually. But the neat thing is that we're there and we can talk at breaks. We can see each other, feel like we get to know each other. I can approach Andy now anywhere, right? I feel like, hey, I know this guy. He's going to be nice to me, right? And we're not adversaries. And I really like that about gear too, is that we put down any kind of dukes that anybody has, and we're all the same. We're just trying to help each other out. And it is, like Andy said earlier, it's a volunteer. This is a volunteer thing. We're not getting paid to be on gear.
Right.
We're paying to be on gear.
Yeah.
And we want to do it, right?
Things, don't we, as well? I know we kind of carry the flag for the PFI. Because the PFI community has been suffering quite badly in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of changes, but gear becomes a focal point. Like I have other PFIs, I'm sure Gary does too. They'll come out and just say, "Look, I'm not engaged in that. Would you give me an update? Can you represent some comments I've got?" And that it wouldn't have happened. I mean, back in 1.0 days, that just the community wasn't there,
right.
and you would be your next QSA friend in the office would be the person you'd ask.
So it's been an evolution
really,
then of
really
interaction over time.
Well, and I like the way too that I'm going to spin off of what Andy said. Even our QSAs at our company say, "Boy, next time you go to gear, can you ask this?"
Yeah.
Or we have a client that says, ask our QSA a question, and they go, "Man, I don't know," or "That's really a weird thing," or "Here's this one statement in the standard for P2PE that just doesn't make sense, and if they just did it this way, it'd be way better," right? Type of a thing. And there's a venue for us to deliver some of those tidbits of feedback outside of the formal feedback process, which the council does great, by the way, but
it feels faster, doesn't it?
It
feels like we can course correct those. And it's usually the silly things, right? It'd be something that everyone's going to go, that's a mistake. And then the standards approach is, well, we'll maybe have to re-release the standard. That's got to go through a whole cycle. We'll issue an errata. That means there's going to be something that else has got to be done. There's a whole legal review. And I don't think most QSAs really appreciate the standards management cycle. Yeah. And I think it's easy. And as well as a QSA, you either go through the compensate and control burn, you go through a QA burn, everyone's had that red line rock that's come back with like, I screwed up, I didn't get my narratives right, I've been there, done that. And then the council becomes like the focal point sometimes of that frustration. And we've even seen amongst our contemporaries, we'll see people who are vocal, but in a way that's not constructive. Like they're frustrated, they vent at the council, and you kind of like, hey, if you channeled that more positively, we might actually get something done. And that's what we tend to do at Gear. We're like, hey, there's some things we can solve for, there's some things we can't. And what's really fascinating now is I think we're in the third iteration, as you said, and we start to link more with the board of advisors. So we've had almost like crossover sessions with the BOA, and then the BOA members are typically our clients. So, there's this really healthy mixture of, some of the biggest players in the industry from the consumer and implementation side, and the biggest players in the industry from the assessment and consulting side can actually sit down in a room and go, hey, we're going to mention this. Does that come up at Gear? Like, can we all make sure we're on the same page? Like if we talk about it like this is our problem. How can we resolve it? And then the council and the brands listen and take action in a way that's just much faster than I think we've ever seen.
So I was speaking to someone who their company is on the board of advisors, and she was telling me yesterday that they won't even consider hiring QSAs that aren't part of Gear. And from what I'm hearing from you, it seems like because there's a maturity of thought and of knowledge and of interaction among the Gear members. Would you say that's...
Well, yeah, and I think, and again, the way that they kind of allow somebody to participate on Gear is because you have supporting a number of programs. So there is you have to kind of be all in a little bit. And I think that may show a level of commitment by a QSA company. Hey, we're not here just to do PCI DSS. We're here to do some of these other, software security framework, and we really want to be all in. But not all QSAs can do all things. I mean, we don't have a hardware lab, and so we don't do PTS stuff, right? And but I hate to feel like an elitist. I don't want to be an elitist, but it really does. Members of the Gear probably are pretty good QSAs typically, right? I mean, because you've been around the block a little bit, so there is something to say about potential quality.
I think of it a little bit like the kind of, it's as close to an MVP program as we're probably going to get anytime soon. And Gary knows I raise this at almost every Gear meeting with Lance and prior members of the council in the past. I was like, I feel like we need a better way to represent the experience in certain people's hands, because we don't. And Gear discussed this, and Gear has kind of become that, but it's still mostly organizational, and there's a little bit of, just you've got to be in all the frameworks, you've got to have all this kind of capacity and resource essentially committed to the council. And we talk about retention of QSAs, because it's a tough job at times. And it would be great to see that acknowledged by the council. Hey, this is a 2-year QSA, it's a 3-year QSA, it's not a 5-year LinkedIn fodder. It's like you're a Q1, 2, 3, something that's consistent with other industry. Like the legal profession do that all the time. And there's lots of other disciplines where you're essentially professional services type person. But there's a way of saying, hey, I've done this for a while. I've got skills, but experience is the application of skill. And I think that's really valuable for the kind of people we work with. And that's why they're now saying, hey, we're just going to focus on the Gear QSA community.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So what is Gear currently working on, or future plans? What kind of interesting things are happening there?
Yeah, and I don't know that we can say a whole lot, but they've been...
It's probably worth saying what we've managed to influence, though.
Okay.
So the in place with remediation scenario was a huge topic for Gear.
Okay.
And it was mainly because a handful of us came together and said, we've all had clients say this is going to be really bad. And it was mostly a contractual thing. And again, so that's one of those things that it's immediately impactful if you're implementing a standard, but it's not necessarily a standards issue. And so there's little things like, hey, if someone checks an in place with remediation, it sounds great. It sounds like we're going to say, hey, there's a continuous cycle of improvement going on. And then we had clients come to us and say, hey, if that gets checked, it's an inference. We weren't compliant at some point.
Right.
And that has
That's a legal
implications contractually
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
that our legal are uncomfortable with. And we're just not sure that it's the right way to go, given the history of the standard. And it's not currently like a CPA-based attestation, so it's not time-bound. It's a point in time. There's always an allowance for remediating an issue and then being compliant. So I think there was things that were done with really good intentions that the gear were able to give that, hey, real-world feedback is, this is a disaster. Like, don't do it.
And they took the feedback and
really quickly as
really
well.
quickly, within one meeting, I
Yeah.
think,
Wow.
had that fixed. So I think another thing that I really like participating on from Gear was probably the last session was they actually came to us and said, how's the ROC template, right? And so we were able to provide a lot of feedback on what we thought would make the ROC template better. And, I don't know that it's still perfect yet.
No.
But the thing that I have confidence is that, hey, they took some of our suggestions and implemented them, and I have confidence that they'll take them again.
Yeah, I do
and
too.
I think that will be so there's some future things. I think as 4.0 moves forward, I think all of us have still only done a handful or two of 4.0s. I think the world is still kind of waiting to see
Yeah.
whether it's real. And I'm going, yeah, it's real.
It's real.
And there's a lot of people rushing to get another 3.2.1
3.2.1
done,
time
so they can go,
before.
I'm going to wait a little bit longer before I have to do 4.
One of my colleagues has done at least half a dozen. I think he's right now possibly the world leader in doing 4.0. And he says it's actually not too bad.
Right. And I
So-
think that's the thing.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway is that they asked and with that input from the
Right.
gear community.
And I think one thing that has really helped there too, I wanted to make a point, I'll kind of go back for a second,
Yeah.
is, you may think, well, it's just the leaders of the council are there, but they have representatives from pretty much all of their teams.
Right.
So somebody from QA is there, somebody from legal is there, people are on the programs or on the technical side that wrote the standard, the management, the guys that do the training. So, we can provide feedback, and they ask for feedback in all these areas. So I remember one of the previous meetings, they had a session on how should we do training going forward in the future. And some of our suggestions, I think, were really well considered, and I think we'll see some of those changes in the training that the QSAs have to get annually in 4.0 moving forward, more modular, things like that. So I think...
And the modular piece was one that they were really keen to get gear feedback on.
Right.
And then Travis, who's the training director, he was super excited to come and show it to gear. He's
Right.
like, I know you guys are going to be happy about this. It means you can do the training once, and if it changes, you can redo it, rather than like, I've got to sit and watch 2 hours of videos again this year,
So it's like they're thinking about us.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think
That's
again,
great.
that's the stuff that people don't realize, that the council are not your adversary. They're the people who are trying to help. And again, sometimes there's a little bit of bureaucracy that we have to manage because we've got to do things consistently, and there's a lot of stakeholders. But the last gear session looked like a meeting of the UN. They increased quite significantly the council stakeholders. I think it was the first time AQM had been properly represented in person, and then legal was there, and it was just it's this phenomenal. That's mine. I'll own it. I'll take it away.
All of them are taking notes.
Really,
right?
yeah.
But really, I think that speaks to the value that the gear brings.
Yeah.
Because if you weren't doing good work, you wouldn't be getting that response from the council.
Right.
To me, it's just been a game changer in industry. And for a long time, we were afraid to talk to the council because we didn't want to say the wrong thing. And now I feel like, hey, they're nice people. They kind of want to make this work too. And I think they probably always were.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying that they weren't and they've changed or anything. I think it's just been a better communications venue, and it's a safe space for us to all be. Right?
I think the safe space is the really important bit. And not in a kind of cliche kind of way. I think in the past it was always, you'd have to call the council, and it's like phone a friend. I'm going to call someone, and then I know, right? But then Gary doesn't know. And so, QSAs move around. They're like, why we used to do it like this. And so we could.
Right.
There's a
the council
danger.
told me this once.
Yeah, there's a danger we create inconsistency in the community in a really bad way, and the only people who pay the price of that are our customers in the collective sense. And I think the ability for us to kind of step back and do a few things for the greater good, like the reporting discussion was really healthy. We even talk about things that are a lot more future state, like is a Word document really what people want? Can we make the data more consumable? Is there anything that we can think about maybe 2 generations down the line before we get lost in like quantum computing and AI and all the crazy stuff? Like, hey, can we just make the standards talk to each other a little bit better? You know, like we've got great standards with SSF. You know, the PFIs are in a strange place because of what's been happening in the marketplace. How do we solve for some of these immediate challenges so that people still get value out of this community? Because if we don't still deliver value as a community, eventually the community just erodes.
Right.
And people will do okay, well, maybe I'll do something else instead.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Final words about either collaboration or gear before we wrap up?
I don't have anything except for a high five, maybe for Andy.
Oh, yeah.
It's really been great. It's fantastic to have these relationships and, build friendships over the years.
I appreciate it. And I think the fact you invited me, I'm somewhat humbled. I think it's amazing that we can do this kind of stuff together. And I think the outside world will go, oh, there's 2 competitors. And we can still achieve stuff that's valuable to everybody.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks
I really
for having
appreciate it. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of Security Metrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.